Hello and welcome to this special India Hangout along with the Indian School of Business in Mohali. I'm going to be joined by a lot of guests. We're going to be talking about corporate social responsibilities, new rules and new vistas. Essentially, the new rules that have been framed and what lies ahead for the companies who have to implement them and the spirit in which they do it and whether that will achieve the objectives that it's been originally drafted for. I'm going to be joined by Bhaskar Chatterjee, Director General and CEO of the Institute of Corporate Affairs, Pradeep Singh of the Indian School of Business, Rakesh Bharti Mittal, Vice Chairman of Bharti Enterprises, and Shefali Chaturvedi, Senior Director at the CII. Thank you all for joining. And Mr. Chatterjee, let me begin with you. We've obviously passed the phase of debate and discussion on the subject. The rules are now a reality. There are a set of sub-rules to determine how CSR should be rolled out and how it will be monitored by the government. Just walk us through what the landscape looks like today in terms of how corporate India is receiving it from your perspective, and what are the challenges ahead, if any?
Yes, I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last part.
Yeah, no, my question was, walk us through what are the challenges that you see ahead to implement CSR in the spirit in which it was outlined for corporate India and from your perspective.
Well, I think the first challenge is to just get everybody on board, to try and create an enabling atmosphere, to try and dispel some of the apprehensions and doubts that naturally corporates might well feel, to achieve a certain comfort level in the operations, to let corporates get used to this so-called new regimen, and to understand that it's not something that is a compulsion. It's something that we want them to do because they want to do it. We acknowledge that many of the companies who will fall under the ambit of the Act have already been doing CSR in very, very meaningful ways. And I think that this Act and the rules provides to them an opportunity to give off their best, to showcase their real talent, and to create, I think, benchmarks and best practices that will soon become for India as a nation a source of great pride. So the first challenge really is to do the ice-breaking, onboarding, and to dispel doubts, apprehensions, and worries.
Right. Okay. So if we were to look at the definitions and the criteria for under which companies are governed, every company which is either a net worth of 500 crores or a turnover of 1,000 crore or a net profit of 5 crores is essentially covered by this, and that has to spend at least 2% of its average net profit for the immediately preceding 3 financial years. The expectation is that almost 22,000 crores might be available per year for CSR activities. Now, does this figure contrast with what was happening already, Mr. Chatterjee?
Yes, at the current level of involvement, our expectation is that something around 14,000 companies will come under the ambit of the Act in line with the qualification criteria that you just now read out. That, of course, is perhaps the reason why we feel that although a large number of companies have been doing CSR, perhaps a very large number are new to the field. And it is, in a sense, our effort through the rules and through the clarifications which have recently come out to try and answer as many queries, doubts, difficulties, what would fall within the CSR domain, what would not. All of those questions we are trying to address frontally and as quickly as possible. Once that happens, and when the initial part is crossed over, I'm sure corporates would come aboard with all the efficiency and the innovation that they demand.
Yeah, and I'm going to come to those new areas that have been defined in a moment. Let me get some more views. Shefali Chaturvedi, from a CII perspective, how are you seeing what has been now made mandatory, and in some ways there is no going back, at least from a legal technical point of view, and how are your members receiving this, and what are some of the steps that they've been taking to make sure that they comply effectively?
Yeah, thanks, Govind. I think from the perspective of industry, after the initial apprehensions and uneasiness which any new change and something certainly something like a CSR, which was largely seen as what you do because you do it for the larger good. It was not something that was really measured from a business perspective. It did cause a flutter. It caused uneasiness because the debate was that it should not be something that's mandatory, and that there are many companies which will now perhaps look at it only from a tick box kind of a thing where they have to just comply with certain reporting formats and others. And of course, when the rules came out, there were a lot of questions and clarifications. But having said that, the larger kind of response that industry has shown is that it is welcome. It is something where people will need to, in a way, if I may say, discipline themselves as companies. And the biggest impact that, if I may say so, is that it has moved from a CSR wing out there that companies may have had, or something that was happening by the leadership, the chief executive. But now it is across the company. It has become a boardroom discussion, and that to me is the single biggest critical positive that has come about, because it was something which we all talked about, but this new ruling has kind of
Right.
ensured that.
So, Shefali, can you give me an illustration of that? When you say this has moved from being something spearheaded by a CEO to something that's more across the board, what is the manifestation, and is there an illustration that perhaps sums it up well?
Yeah, I think this is something which is all across. So it's not really any one company per se, because as was mentioned earlier by Dr. Chatterjee as well, there were certain companies, be it the large business houses, who were already kind of looking at it from an overall sustainability point of view. There were the national voluntary guidelines that were being followed. But now what has really happened, the turnaround, is that every single company that qualifies for this, one, they're going to be measuring their total spend. And to respond to a question that you asked earlier, we did an analysis within the CII, and we just looked at the profits of the top 100 companies last year in terms of the CSR spend that was talked about, and it was about 1,700 crores. And now we are talking about, if you just look at the same 100 companies which are listed, and you look at what it might be with the 2%, we are looking at, that was just about 25% of what is going to be available next year. So the quantification of what they're going to be spending on, that is the change that's all pervasive, which we're seeing in terms of, the way we are seeing it. We're having companies who are now, the CSR committees that are being set up, the seriousness with which the whole thing is being viewed. Everything has changed. I think it's completely revamped
and you're saying that this is clearly out of a desire to do something good and not out of fear of what might happen if you don't.
No, I think it's a mixed bag. So I won't say it's a fear. It wasn't so much as the fear part, but I would put it as, there is still a certain amount of apprehension and concern, as with all things new, as to how are we going to report. Because there's a certain amount of stringent, the compliance that is required, and so and there hasn't been too much of capacity in this area within the companies in the CSR field. So in the process of gearing up for that, yes, there's still a lot of concerns, and that it shouldn't become something where, because companies need to say I spend 2% on XYZ area, so it shouldn't become a bottleneck from what earlier companies may have been spending things on, and as part of CSR. So give you an example. If you're looking at something which is you did some good and you said it was CSR, but right now they're saying, okay, these are the things that are there in Schedule 7. I must do something that I can directly quantify. And as a result, the conversations are, will need to increase around what all can you do as part of CSR. So some things may suffer in the short run, is what we feel.
Right. So, Mr. Chatterjee, let me come back to you now. So there are 2 or 3 parts as I am seeing. So one is, let's say, those companies which feel that they are under some sort of threat to implement this in some form. The second is, of course, those who were always doing it, and the third is perhaps those who were not doing it or doing it, but in some ways getting ready or are geared up for this new regime. Now, my question to you is, the first one is that if this is indeed done in an atmosphere of fear in some ways or concern, will it achieve the genuine objectives it set out to achieve? And if not, what can we do about it?
My response to that, I think, is very clear. First of all, the way the Act and the rules are framed, the primary principle is comply or explain. And hence, this is not a mandatory provision.
Right.
It doesn't. If you are not doing your CSR, it's not something that's forcing you to do it. You only need to inform the public domain as to why you don't want to do it. Of course, that explanation will be in the public domain, and it's for you to then stand up to that explanation. Will we achieve our objectives? Well, certainly there is a great deal of optimism that we will. But for anything as large as this, as national as this, as widespread as this, to give an unequivocal yes or no is perhaps premature. My belief is that if the three elements of this CSR implementation process, government on the one hand, of course, companies, corporate India on the other, and we must not forget the implementing agencies, who are essentially of only three types. They are either societies under the Societies Registration Act, trusts under the Trust Acts of the state government, or Section 8 companies, not-for-profit companies. These are the implementing agencies who need to step up to the plate and say, we will involve our capacities, we'll upgrade our skills, and we will deliver on the ground. It is actually this triad which has to synergize and then deliver impact.
Right. Okay. Mr. Singh, let me come to you and get a maybe slightly different view on this. How are you seeing it from a third-party point of view, if one can call it that, at least at this point, and the interplay between government on one hand and business on the other in an area where there was no interplay in the past?
I think this interplay that you refer to, Govind, is the first thing that one should take cognizance of. I think it's taking the concept of public-private partnership to really a new level, at a very exciting higher level, where the government is essentially saying, we no longer claim to be the monopoly providers of public services. We no longer claim to be the monopoly provider of development-oriented spending or programs. And we acknowledge, that's the other important message that I think we should explicitly recognize, that we acknowledge that the private sector not only has a role and responsibility, but perhaps an edge, perhaps an advantage in being able to deliver the kind of services and the kind of asset creation that have been seen to be a monopoly of the government. But the private sector can do it better, can target it better, can be more efficient, can bring better technology to it, can do it perhaps more honestly, if you like. That is the expectation, and it is now for the private sector to respond to this opportunity as well as the duty that is being given to it. I mean, if you think about it, the alternative could easily be that the government taxes you 2% more and takes the money and spends the money merrily as it spends the rest of the tax revenues. But in this case, the government says, no, we leave it in the hands of the private sector, and we are hoping that you will be able to identify community problems better, you will be able to deliver solutions better, and you will do so in an honest and forthright fashion. So that, to me, is what this really represents. And you asked early on about what are the challenges. And the challenges are that we don't understand this, or the challenges are that the system claws back and takes away these advantages that are being at this time perceived to exist. So, for example, if this whole, this is serious money. We're talking about 23,000 crores of rupees being made available. If this money gets hijacked by vested interests, or gets poorly spent, or spent only on paper, or siphoned out, the usual ills that very often affect development programs, then you lost the game before it even gets started. So I think it is time that the private sector were to shed its inhibitions and doubts and plunge into this and recognize that their business is not only doing business, and they should put their money where their mouth is. They've complained far too long that government doesn't deliver. It's their time to show that they can. As far as ISB is concerned, we see ourselves being very happily positioned to facilitate this process, to contribute to the building of capacities to deliver on this the outcomes, and to ourselves be a beneficiary, hopefully, of some of the CSR funding, because education is a major and important eligible sector under Schedule 7, and we as an educational institution of high quality hope to be able to benefit from it. But more importantly, as a management school, we want to invest in creating the capacities among the professionals in the corporate sector to be able to manage CSR activity in a more professional and efficient manner. We want to be able to use our abilities to help the boards of directors and independent directors understand what this policy means, to help them in designing policies as they are required to do, and we expect to participate in all of that, and perhaps even work with them in designing those policies as facilitators.
Right. Okay. Let me ask Shefali first, and then Mr. Chatterjee. What are the 2 or 3 areas you feel this legislation will actually result in something new and good happening? I'm not saying that there was no good happening earlier, but what could be new because either the companies have decided to look at this differently, or as you said, Shefali, there's new capacity coming in, new talent coming in, which is now focused on this issue.
So clearly, one pretty good thing that I think will come out as a development from this whole thing is that companies so far were looking at, doing good individually, those who were working in this area. But with this coming into existence, the greatest opportunity as we see it within the CII is what we call clustering. So you have a number of companies who may, come together, and together they could be very high impact development projects on the ground that can take off. So, collaboration, people coming together, greater impact projects is one thing which I think could be a great, thing coming out of this. The other thing is that while it has not been, kind of specified in so many in so many words yet, but a great opportunity that is possible is that all the national schemes that we have currently, Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan, for example, whether it's their midday meal scheme, and Anganwadi and those kind of opportunities that are there, you still have them drawing the private sector, the companies to come and participate by way of CSR. So, you top what is already there existing, and you bring some new elements. So, similarly, there could be other national schemes of the government where you can, I think now, in a modular way, kind of make things a little more explicit, where the corporate sector should be able to come in through the CSR to enhance what is already there, not replicate certainly, but then to add on to it. So that's the second opportunity that I see. The third is what has already been talked about. So far, we didn't really have too many CSR professionals. You had individuals who were coming from different streams, and they were kind of functioning as the CSR people within companies. Clearly, now you're going to have, this being focused on in a big way. We had ISB talking about it. There are many other institutes. I know ISA themselves are looking at this. So that's one good thing that I think is going to come out of it. And apart from that, I think the whole focus on impact measurement, which so far has just not been part of our lexicon. It's like we talk about, we have done this, but what exactly has come out of it? It's something which has not really been monitored in that sense. So I think just the sheer measuring of the impact that it took is going to be a positive that we're going to see.
Right.
So these, I think, are some of the positives.
Okay. So measurement is an important thing. Thanks for pointing that out, Shefali. Let me come to you, Mr. Chatterjee. Now, I think the question that I was asking was, what are the 1 or 2 new things that could happen potentially because of this new way of doing things? And secondly, I'm not talking about whether the 2% is spent or not, but will there be other ways of measuring the real impact of the philosophy of this whole endeavor?
Yeah, what I'd like to say, Govind, is there are several issues here, and I'll sort of briefly touch upon them. Shefali correctly said that this is a field that will now rapidly professionalize. If companies were to do a large marketing program, they would hire a marketing professional. with a marketing degree. If they were to do a financial program, they would hire a finance professional. If they were to try and do that now and hire CSR professionals, they don't exist. Not here, perhaps not in the entire world. And one of the things that IICA, our Indian Institute of Corporate Affairs, which is the principal service provider in the CSR sector, we have just announced the starting of our certified program, a 9-month certified program, to create CSR professionals in this country. It's a completely online program, and I'm sure that we have taken so much of care in preparing the modules that those who take this program will really benefit a great deal and benefit the entire CSR sector. Actually, what is happening is that CSR is now moving from the back room to the boardroom. It's become a board concern. And the Act tasks the board and the CSR committee of the board not just to monitor what is happening on a day-to-day basis, but actually to ensure that every single activity mentioned in the policy happens on the ground, takes place on the ground. So it's no longer, just a set of orders or sanctions that are issued. When we look at the opportunity of measuring impact, social impact assessment is still a very new field, not just in India, across the globe. But here, for the first time in India, we will, I think, even professionalize this field, because in the end, the nation will want to know that if we are spending about 16,000-18,000 rupees every year on CSR, what exactly is the impact that we are creating? And somewhere when the nation asks these questions, some very, very well-organized, competent professionals should be able to give us this answer. And I think companies will have to play a very big role here. Shefali drew our attention to one very, very important factor. There is much that the government is already doing. And to be able to supplement or complement some of those social activities is a huge opportunity. And therefore, there is another area in which companies can apply their minds and see that that develops. A final word I wanted to mention, because so much of the actual implementation of CSR activities will be in the hands of NGOs, of the voluntary sector, civil society organizations. We have to pay heed to their needs, their requirements, the way that their skills will develop. And one of the important things that the rules themselves have now provided for is that corporates, as part of their CSR expenditure, can not only do learning, development, and upgradation of skills for their own staff and their own CSR personnel, but they can also spend this money as CSR expenditure to upgrade the skills of implementing agencies, the voluntary sector. So there is also that huge opportunity to create a great deal of CSR efficiency and CSR competence right across the board.
Right. So what are the one or two areas that from your own experience and understanding where you think the impact could be, or rather new impact could be seen, or could be, or areas could be sort of identified that companies could work on?
Well, first and foremost, I think the principal improvement that I see is that corporates will actually begin to engage with communities. The community corporate engagement I really haven't seen in any material terms practically anywhere, except for a very few companies which may count on the fingers of one hand. Very few companies actually engage with communities. This will be the first opportunity when companies can really, through voluntary sector or whatever the medium, actually connect with people on the ground and be able to see how much of an effect they create, what a difference they make to their lives. That, I think, is a revelation that many companies will feel. The second important part, I think, that companies now need to look at is very many companies were actually doing a lot many activities. There were companies which had, 200, 300 activities, one camp here, a little medical school here, spraying the water right across the garden. Now corporates will focus their activities, actually have a lesser number of projects, more intense, so that the outcome and the measurement of that outcome will actually guide the way that they identify and execute their projects.
So that's a good point, and let me bounce that back to Shefali. Shefali, do you feel that one is the measurement matrix falling in place, and secondly, is that likely to produce the outcome that Mr. Chatterjee was talking about?
I'm sorry, I couldn't catch the last of your question.
Sorry, my question was, will a measurement matrix provide the kind of outcome that Mr. Chatterjee was talking about? In terms of companies either doing new things or doing old things differently, and of course, creating some sort of focus in the number of things that they're doing.
Well, a couple of years back, we had done a kind of an analysis within the CI membership as to the sectors where companies feel they need to do CSR. And there were clearly areas which are no different from what we say are the MDG goals. When you talk about education, you talk about things related to women empowerment and gender equality. You look at health and sanitation and environmental sustainability. And these clearly were the areas where companies felt their CSR should go into and CSR is going into. Now, if I was to look at what's going to happen now, I pretty much think that these are there to remain. These are going to be the areas where companies are going to look at maybe enhancing, going deeper, being able to, so how they do things and what is the overall impact is what is going to change. I don't think there's going to be too much of change prima facie in the sectors where the work is done. Of course, it's going to throw up opportunities of many other areas. Take sports, for example. Now here, what was going as CSR, which was largely, let's say, sponsorships, that is going to perhaps hopefully change, and it's going to be, far more in-depth, things in terms of what is done to actually get something like, sports off the ground and view that differently from a program. So I think in terms of sectors, largely they'll remain. What is going to change is the way they are looked at.
Okay, and Shefali, what are your concerns as an extension of that? I mean, do you at this point feel that the government is likely to be collaborative and participative about this, or do you feel that there could be some pressure, for instance, in the way the auditors ask questions? I mean, the auditors will be asking questions in order to obviously prepare the balance sheets and so on.
Well, I think, best case scenario is that, we have a collaboration and the government and everybody come forward and it's like, it's Eden, but I don't think it's going to happen so quickly. I think initially companies will have to gear themselves to doing it, to figuring things out and perhaps doing it a little alone. I think it's being talked about, one of the biggest challenges that companies are facing right now is finding the right implementation partners, and all of this is going to be completely, it's going to go awry, it's not going to work till you have the implementation bodies, whether they equip their own foundations to do it, whether they have intermediary entities to do it, or whether it is the NGOs as the last mile connectors who do it. I mean, today you have, I think it was a government study done 2-3 years back when we learned there were 3.3 million NGOs in the space. But and if you really look at what it means, you're talking about for every 400 Indians in this country there is an NGO. And in which case perhaps the implementation should be so much better. It's more than the primary schools that we have in our country or primary healthcare centers. But clearly that's not the situation. So while NGOs and others are going to professionalize themselves and there are going to be bodies trying to help them, but when you get started, there are going to be a lot of pain and pans to just kind of somehow get it right. And I'm talking not so much about the large business houses who pretty much have their act together. I'm talking about the medium sector kind of companies who are going to really have to gear themselves, and they need a lot of help.
Right. Mr. Chatterjee, there are 10 themes that have been defined. They range from healthcare and education to something more specific like technology incubators and armed forced veterans. Now, are these 10 themes likely to be expanded? I know there has been some discussion on this, but for the sort of our audience who will watch this, what are those themes likely to be, and what is the philosophy that's going to drive the themes in future? And perhaps maybe you could quickly dwell upon the philosophy that chose you to select these themes in the first place.
Well, let me clarify straight away that those 10 items that are there in Schedule 7, at least in the immediate foreseeable future, there is not likely to be any expansion. It is within the ambit of these 10 sectors that we would expect companies to come on board and start working. What was the criteria for choosing these 10? Not really. I think Shefali already mentioned that the global compact, the issues that were generally driving the development sector, not just in India but across the world, and these are in a way Indian but also universal concerns. So there is what you might call a certain level of agreement on these 10 sectors. Let's move forward on them. And then if there is an opportunity in the future, one can't say when, that might well happen. I wanted to mention a couple of concern that perhaps you might like to flag off here. One is that we would expect the execution of these programs to be done on project mode. So the old idea of handouts or distribution of freebies, or what is now referred to in CSR parlance as checkbook charity, for our CSR program is virtually dead. You really need to take a project or a program from end to end. There has to be the elements of monitoring, of evaluation, of actual implementation, of tracking, perhaps actually doing a baseline survey to understand what is it that the community actually needs as opposed to what you think they need. So the whole project or projectivization mode of doing things now comes straight into the middle of the implementation process. That's what I thought I'll flag off, so that will mean that companies will now look at activities not as just one-off, one-time, intermittent things they do off and on. This has to be a sustained activity over a period of time that brings real benefits to communities.
Right, and is this? Is this something that's out of emerged from strategic thinking going forward, or is it because this is a sort of lacunae that you've noticed, or the Department of Corporate Affairs has noticed in the past?
No, it's not something that the ministry or the department has noticed. That's been a general development perception. Very often, development experts themselves have said that so much of the so-called social work that companies do are more intermittent or one-off or one time. And when we were framing these rules and we were trying to put the act together, there was a general feeling among thinkers in this area that we needed needed a far more focused approach to what actually needed to be done. So a lot of thought, a lot of finishing, a lot of ideas as to how we would implement, how we would actually make a difference on the ground. Those are the concerns that activated this whole line of thinking. And I'm sure corporates appreciate that, because that's what they really want to do. In the end, if they are going to make a success of their CSR program, and Shefali rightly said, a lot of serious engagement is actually going on in boardrooms. They see this as an opportunity now rather than a threat of any kind. And the working, the feeling, the way discussions are taking place as of now is how can we do it well? How best can we do it? How can we devote our energies, our strengths to make a real difference? I think that's the change that's going to come.
Right. So, Mr. Singh, let me come to you now. I mean, again, if you were to look at both the government on one end having created a somewhat mandatory environment for CSR, and the companies who are now getting their act together to deliver on this, do you see them being able to do it with the spirit and the philosophy that Mr. Chatterjee just spoke of, which is, at one level doing long-term sustained projects, another level having the assessment matrix to do, to kind of measure what they're doing, and of course keep the whole thing going in a manner that's truly beneficial for the country, which is why this whole thing was embarked upon.
Yeah, Govind, you call it somewhat mandatory. Mr. Chatterjee said it's not mandatory. That's really, I think, the starting point for this. And I think this is actually wonderful the way we are starting this initiative by actually saying we want the driver to be your self-awareness. We want the driver to be the fact that you're going to go in the public domain to claim what you have done or to explain why you haven't done it, and that's going to be the reason why you will do the right thing. It's a different way of doing things. This is not through inspectors and police Raj that we are trying to get people to respond to the needs of the community. Time will show. Time will show. The hope is that we've created a movement, as it were. We've created a corpus of funds. We are trying to create a new tradition. But time will show whether this will actually translate into the quality indicators that we are referring to, whether it is the focus, whether it is the programmatic approach, whether it is the projectization, whether it is the movement away from the checkbook culture, or the movement from a concern only with the inputs to indeed a concern with the outcomes and the output, whether we are delivering results or not. Those will emerge as corporates realize more and more what Mr. Chatterjee referred to as an opportunity rather than a threat. The moment you start realizing that this is not something we are doing to file a return and to make sure that no inspector or policeman visits us, but it is actually an opportunity. And if we are going to spend this kind of money, if we are going to put in the effort, why don't we see that there is a meaningful outcome? And the moment we realize, the corporates realize that this is about finally taking charge by engaging with the community and by acknowledging that nation building and economic development is a joint effort. It's not a MyBop culture where the government is supposed to do things and we are supposed to either receive or criticize. Then those things will happen. They won't happen automatically, but I think this is the step in the right direction. A river usually cleans itself as it flows. So let's not sort of start prejudging very quickly, or let's not start taking out the plant from the pot every 20 minutes to see the roots are coming well. Let this sink in and let people understand what this is, that this is an opportunity being given to them.
Mr. Chatterjee, under this section 135, I mean, the things have been defined. We have a catchment of companies who will be contributing from their profits. Now, what about the companies that fall outside it, which obviously are the larger number? What is the thinking in terms of encouraging or bringing those companies which are not necessarily part of the profitable pool, quote unquote, to do things that are important for the society in general and for their environment in specific, particularly in businesses which are have a direct play with their immediate environment, maybe extractive industries or other infrastructure and so on sectors?
Yes, good question, Govind, and something that occupies some mind space in all of us. We actually set this threshold so that some of the best corporates that have a fair amount of profit generation, they get on board first. But clearly, our expectation is that once they are on board, they will set the example. They will actually form the benchmarks. And there is this lurking hope or expectation, you might call it, perhaps even a dream, that when these companies start doing effective CSR and getting real value from that raft of operations, many of those who don't actually fall within the ambit today might want to partner with those who are actually doing CSR. Shefali again talked about how much of an opportunity this is for companies to come together to do things jointly. And if there is, let us say, a consortium of 2 or 3 companies working at a large, impactful project, then others who are in that area, maybe in that geographical area, or even in that domain, they might say, okay, hey, why don't we put in our little bit? Although we don't qualify under the provisions of the Act, but surely we too can make a difference. And here, I think, lies that opportunity of this core group of companies actually setting those examples and then widening that circle. Then, rather than have legislation and saying, okay, now let's lower the parameters so that we have more and more companies, there will be a voluntary spirit that drives this. More and more companies will want to come on board, will want to partner with those who are already doing things. And if we can kindle that spirit, if we can enliven that approach, then I think, Govind, India is really headed for good things to come.
Right. Shefali, how would you look at this from the point of view of companies who are, in environments, and I mean the physical environments which have a direct impact on, either the topography or the people and their livelihoods and so on. And do you see companies doing or using this to actually clean up their act, particularly in cases where they may not have done this before?
Certainly. I think that is something which has been the writing on the wall for a while now in terms of a lot of, even before, let's say, the CSR rules and what they've specified have come into being. You've seen over the last couple of years, the people, the citizens, a lot of movements where they have, been asked, they've been answerable, so to speak. And perhaps, this is going to become the conduit, or this is going to become the what will ignite that action, and certainly I think it's going to make a difference to companies in such sectors.
Right. So, do you see, for instance, any specific examples that might set the trend, so to speak, Shefali, in coming months, or have they already been such examples which are in some ways different from what we've seen in the past, which of course was companies taking their own initiative?
I think at the moment it's early days, because right now companies are just kind of gearing up to kind of see, does anything change from what they were doing earlier and how do they do it differently now. So you won't see trends so quickly. I think it's going to take a while to settle down. So far, it's really been, in terms of what is being done is what was being done earlier. But what we're going to see coming in I suppose in the next couple of months, we'll have a clearer picture as to areas that, or specific projects that are, away from the beaten path, which are going to emerge.
So, Mr. Rakesh Mittal has joined us now. Mr. Mittal, we've been talking about CSR and how it's going to play out for India Inc., both from the India Inc. point of view as well as from the government point of view, and what it desires, and whether this new legislation will roll out in the way that it is supposed to do, particularly from the objectives that it was meant to achieve. Can I understand from you, from a Bharti point of view, how do you see this new piece of legislation rolling out, and how do you in some ways fit it to what you've been already doing in the past?
Thank you, and good afternoon. Clearly from my perspective, I just heard what Shefali was saying, and I'm very clear in my mind that the corporate sector in India Inc. is going to put their best foot forward.
Right, I think we lost Mr. Mittal there, but we'll come back to him in a second. Yeah, okay, we've got him back. Yes, Mr. Mittal, sorry, go ahead.
So I was saying there are a large number of corporates who are already doing CSR even before the Act was put into place, including the Schedule 7. Having said that, what I see, most of the companies are now in the process of, and some of them have already formed their CSR committees. They have started appraising and assessing the projects. As far as Bharti is concerned, Bharti is fully committed to this through its various group companies on the CSR, including the philanthropic initiative through Bharti Foundation. And my belief is that while there are some gray areas and companies and individuals have been seeking clarifications from the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, including CII, having said which need to be clarified. But I don't think that the companies in the right earnest are going to wait for those clarifications to come. We will see some movement happening during this year. Will there be a complete or full impact of spending 2%? The answer is no, because the process says that you have to have a committee, you need to assess a project. Once the project gets finalized, only then you start funding those projects. And I had a chat with Mr. Bhaskar Chaturvedi, who's already on the panel with us, and had requested him that we should actually encourage the companies to go and start spending money on CSR in these sectors which are listed out in Schedule 7, so that we don't miss out on whatever expenditure can happen during 2014-15, which will only benefit the public at large.
Right. So can you also tell us how the efforts are getting synchronized in your own group between different companies and the foundation that's already doing work in areas like education?
So Bharti Foundation is already into education as a major initiative, running 254 village schools, reaching out to now 41,000 children. And this funding has been coming through the family, our allies, as well as the group companies. So clearly, whatever money needs to be spent by the Bharti group today, a lion's share out of that will go to the foundation for sure. But having said that, there will be funds available for doing other initiatives across the country, and that will really now depend on what projects are available for my team to go and start spending the CSR money.
So, which really brings me to my next question. So, would you see this 2% as something that you would do additionally, or would you bring it all under one basket?
No, the 2% has to be spent by the companies, while Bharti Foundation is only an execution arm, which is the philanthropic arm of Bharti Enterprises.
That's right.
It will receive funding from these companies, and it is not that we are only getting funding from the group companies. I'm getting funding from individuals. I'm getting funding from other corporates. And to my mind, I think what is important today to take this initiative forward is, while the companies want to go ahead and spend money, they are not finding credible partners.
Right.
And I think that is where IICA and CII are going to play a very, very positive role. And the biggest bottleneck today, which I see, is the transparency amongst the NGOs, because any company or any individual who gives money wants to see that the money is spent judiciously. It is spent in a very transparent manner, and every rupee walks that much longer. So there are large number of NGOs and societies, foundations and trusts, including Bharti Foundation, which are doing this work in a highly transparent manner. And I think more and more such initiatives we need to see, so that the funding can get channelized into the right sector, depending on what areas they want to spend money on.
Right. So you're saying that there is a capacity challenge right now for companies, whether within the company or in terms of partners outside. Are there any other challenges that you see in the way this legislation will be implemented or is sought to be implemented, Mr. Mittal?
We had, while we were engaging with the government, the then Minister, Mr. Sachin Pilot, I had a series of meetings with my CII colleagues. And India Inc.'s, the mandate is very, very clear that don't put this as something which needs to be done. Leave it to us, and we will ensure that the money is spent for the right causes and for the right areas where we should go and make impact. The challenges are going to be always there as and when a new policy or a new act comes into place. Because once we start rolling out that, there would be challenges which would be on the ground. But I'm also very clear that all the stakeholders will sit together and ensure that all those hurdles which are in place get removed. And more importantly, I think if my data is correct, about 16,000 companies are going to get covered under this. Almost 13,000 companies will be spending less than 1 crore. And I think those are the companies who don't know where to go, who don't know what to do with the money and where to spend. And I don't want a situation where you see some unscrupulous individuals or NGOs coming up. Actually, not individuals, it's only NGOs with a track record of 3 years, to come up with projects which are not fully monitored or not monitored very closely. And I understand IICA has started some programs for the corporates and individuals for them to really understand how to take this initiative.
Right, Mr. Chatterjee, if I can come back to you for a second here, what's the kind of touch that the government or the Ministry of Corporate Affairs is going to administer in managing this or administering this regulation? Is it going to be a soft touch or a light touch or a hard touch? What can people expect, or what should they expect?
Well, when we started this chat session, I did mention that our whole approach at this point is to try and create a completely enabling atmosphere. Our idea is let the work begin, let the work start. We are not in this whole idea of looking over people's shoulders, trying to point out whether they're doing right or wrong. Our whole purpose is to let the wisdom reside in the boardrooms of the companies. Very, very enlightened boards, very fine minds. Here they have a very fine opportunity. Let them see how best they can utilize it. I remember in a conversation I had with Rakesh recently, he mentioned to me that rather than set deadlines about when companies should have their policies in place, allow them to do it at their own pace. Let them, in fact, start work even before they do the formalities. And that's been the approach of the ministry so far. Even in the latest clarifications that we have issued, we have said that the interpretation of the items under Schedule 7 should be as broad as possible. And therefore, the whole attitude here is allow companies the freedom to think. We've set the very broad parameters. Let them work on these parameters. Let them see how best each company, and each company has its own genius, its own dynamism, its own approach, its own thinking. Let those come into this aspect of work. And I'm sure that each company will demonstrate on the ground with the passage of time what a real difference they can make. With respect to Rakesh's very genuine concern about not doing things transparently or allowing NGOs to mushroom who perhaps may not have the required credibility, he's right. We are about to start very shortly what we call the Implementation Agency Hub. And we are trying to, as a service provider, do the due diligence for companies. And we are going to create in this hub a database of companies with the good track record, the good background, whose companies are free to access our website, access that hub, and if they wish to choose NGOs from there, they're most welcome. Of course, they're at liberty to also engage with any NGOs of their own choice. But we as facilitators or helpers will go on providing services that would be of great benefit to companies who are trying to do things transparently and genuinely.
Okay, one quick last question to you, Mr. Chatterjee, and I'm going to go back to the other panelists for a sum up as well. I'm also sensing that what you're doing now, I'm not necessarily saying in your present position as IICA, but is going somewhere beyond what government is supposed to do or is traditionally seen as doing. You're really now almost batting on the other side, and I'm not saying that negatively, but in a positive way. But yet it means stretching a mandate of governance considerably beyond what perhaps it was supposed to be. Now, to me, is this also a concern in some ways?
No, I won't say stretching it or developing it. We know what government's mandate is, what the act and the rules are. we also see the other side of it, because we are an organization that is expected to provide services to companies and to the corporate sector, to India Inc. So we not only do work in CSR, we also work in the areas of company law, corporate finance, corporate governance. So we have a whole host of issues that impinge on corporate affairs as a discipline. One of the things, because of the new legislation and the new rules, if there are areas where companies demand some form of services and we can be of some help to them, then that's all our endeavor is. But we are very much within the mandate and the overall governance principles of the Ministry of Corporate Affairs. We cannot step outside them.
Right. Okay. So I'm going to come to Shefali to start with now for a quick sum up. Shefali, as we close, one opportunity that you see arising out of all of this. Obviously, we are already in a work in progress mode. This is not. This is no longer a idea for the future. And one challenge that you foresee that will have to be addressed.
Well, the biggest opportunity which I see, which I mentioned earlier, is companies coming together and being able to work for a larger impact. And there are going to be various facilitating organizations to do that. And we ourselves in the CII Foundation is looking at exactly this, helping companies come together and look at high impact projects on the ground. So that, I think, is going to be one big change that we see today. In terms of challenge, we've talked about capacity of people. I won't talk about that, but certainly I see one thing which could be a challenge or an opportunity, whichever you want to look at it, which is that earlier we used to have NGOs where there was a lot of international funding coming in. In a way, it's been replaced by a lot of Indian corporate sector funding that's coming in. And while we've taken all good care that for about the project should be for 2-3 years, but what happens in scenarios when the companies are not able to give that kind of money to the same project? And what happens after those 2-3 years? So that is something which will have to be looked at carefully, because you cannot start a good thing and perhaps not continue it over a period of time. So that, I think, could be one of the challenges.
So goes to the point Mr. Chatterjee made earlier about the sustainability of projects that are embarked upon. Mr. Singh, 2 points from you, one challenge, one opportunity.
Sorry, I didn't hear you.
Mr. Singh, to you. Yeah, the question was. Yeah. Pradeep Singh, the question is to you. One challenge, one opportunity.
Well, as I mentioned early on, this represents a paradigm shift in governance, really. It is laying down a new framework by which the community, the industry, private sector, and the government can come together to deliver on economic development and social development, delivery of public goods and merit goods. There is the opportunity, and there is also the challenge that people need to understand what this stands for and to be able to engage with it in that spirit and allow the quantitative and qualitative improvements and evolution to happen in time, whether there are capacity challenges or challenges of settled practice. But these will, once the seed has been sown, these challenges will get resolved.
Right. Mr. Mittal, last word from you. How do you, one key challenge and one key opportunity that you see as Bharti Group arising out of the Section 135 legislation for CSR?
Well, honestly, I think the challenge from our perspective is going to be looking at the right projects across the country for my group companies to spend money, since Bharti Foundation is only in the 6 states where they are working. The opportunity, to my mind, is that, and it's not only for Bharti, I think it is broadly for India Inc., is that they will now participate and play a big role in bringing about social projects which will lead to social change. And I'm absolutely clear in my mind that there are opportunities for ISB, Bharti Institute of Public Policy, to actually actively engage in creating not only a lot of awareness, but also have different, if I may say, sessions on sensitizing the stakeholders. So clearly, Bharti Institute of Public Policy has an opportunity. IACA is going to play a big role. CII on its front, the council of CSR, which I'm heading, will ensure that all the group companies within the CII are sensitized, are given the data for them to start moving forward, including hosting the large good NGOs who are doing outstanding work in different areas all across the country. So I think there are more opportunities than challenges, if I may say so, because the challenges will be ironed out and sorted out. I don't see that as a big one. I think the only challenge for India Inc. and the companies is going to be to find the right partner to execute and have the right projects which will go and make a large, huge positive impact where it is required.
Right, Mr. Mittal, thank you very much for that. Thank you all for joining us on this Indian School of Business Boom News special, which looks at corporate social responsibility, new rules, new vistas, of which clearly there are many. One of the challenges, as was pointed out, is to create interesting projects that have a genuine impact on the environment in the specific and the physical sense, as well as the general sense, and of course for business to create the capacity to deliver to this very interesting new mandate from the government, which, as things stand, everyone, both government, academia, as well as India Inc., seem quite committed to work together and deliver. Thank you very much for being with us on this special edition.